Tanzawa Atsushi is one of the best characters in Out and an easy all-time favorite for me. He's a powerful character who holds a lot of weight within the series, and his origin story is something I find very captivating. In this video, I'll be breaking down Tanzawa and Josuke's character within the flashback, as well as talk about the main messages I got from reading it. If you guys end up enjoying the video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to show support for what I do. Now, what kind of events transformed the current head of Kilahito into the person he is today? Let's talk about it.
Everybody get your fucking hands up.
This backstory set out to accomplish four main things. The first is to give insight on Tanzawa's terrible upbringing and show different major turning points in his life. The second is to give insight on Josuke's personality, as well as dive deeper into Josuke's relationship with Tanzawa. The third was to support the themes of the series by providing various different messages that helped shape the way Tanzawa and even Josuke thinks. The last was to set up the future conflict between Tanzawa and Yoshiki, as well as tease the mystery behind what happened during the dying moments of Josuke. The backstory is separated into 7 main scenes. Let's start with the first one. The backstory begins in a room of the Tanzawa household. We quickly see domestic violence between Tanzawa's mother and her boyfriend Minamida Kosuke shown right in front of the face of Tanzawa, and through their dialogue we can assume they have a pimp and prostitute relationship. From the jump, the reader quickly understands that this isn't an appropriate household for any kid to be raised in, and seeing Tanzawa living these conditions gives a bit of insight on where his whole ideology surrounding violence came from. The scene continues with Minamida about to choke the mother to death, but Tanzawa intervenes to save his mother and ends up getting beat up terribly. While lying on the floor nearly unconscious, he hears his mother wish that he would have never been born, so her life could have turned out a bit better. And of course, to anyone who hears such a terrible thing directly from the parents, especially a child, it really fucks him up mentally. We move on to the second scene, which showcases how Josuke was a person before he joined Kilahito. A kid named Riku tried to stand up to some bullies to protect him and his girlfriend, but ended up getting pretty hurt. Josuke comes in and saves him, then proceeds to give him some great advice for the future. This was a short and simple scene, but it provides a great message that supports some themes in the series. Let's take a look at what Josuke was telling Riku. Josuke tells Riku that it's understandable to want to look cool in front of your girlfriend, but when you're placed in an unwinnable situation, you must protect her from danger by any means necessary, even if it means paying them and getting on your knees to beg for them to leave you alone. He follows up by saying she won't think any less of you for protecting her that way, and you can always get revenge later. This can pretty much be broken down into 2 messages. One being it isn't shameful doing whatever it takes to protect those who are important to you, and the second being revenge is always on the table, so keep yourself safe and never rush into an early grave. Throughout the series, we see the core of these messages in action. When backed into a corner, a lot of the characters tend to act in very extreme ways to get out of the situation, whether it's extreme kneeling and begging, or extreme violence to the point of even killing. We see what Josuke was talking about when it comes to doing whatever it takes to make sure you or your friends can survive and live to see another day. Then we move on to the theme of revenge, and as expected from a Delinquent series, this one's pretty dark. This concept of coming back for revenge is a dark reality many people tend to ignore, but in the world of Out, the price for ignoring could come with your life. We see over and over and over again where revenge has been the cause for a lot of these conflicts, and we also see the lengths characters go through to prevent their ops from taking revenge, including blackmail, torture, and even mutilation. We then move on to the third scene, where we get Tanzawa on the roof. After remembering his mother wishing for him to never exist, Tanzawa attempts to commit suicide and is stopped by Josuke. We see just how much of a negative effect those words had on Tanzawa, and we also get a bit of insight on why Tanzawa has such a high adoration for Josuke, who just saved his life. After Tanzawa gets saved, he and Josuke sit in silence for a few hours, and then Tanzawa starts asking about the future. They have a light conversation, speaking about Josuke's middle school life and how their friend Kanami is doing, but then it starts approaching heavier topics about life and its purpose. Josuke proceeds to give dialogue that gives insight on delinquent culture, hints of what Kirihito means to its members, as well as provide a new perspective on why delinquents lack normal morals and ethics. Tanzawa asks Josuke if his life will always stay as hard as it currently is, and Josuke says it most likely will, but he believes everyone needs dreams and goals in their life to enjoy, since without it, life in those conditions would definitely not be worth living. He believes everyone is born to enjoy those dreams and goals regardless of whether they're good goals or bad ones. And as mentioned earlier, this idea helps us understand that most of these delinquents might seem to want to achieve bad things, but at the end of the day, they need goals and dreams to keep on going. Josuke implies that when your life is going that terribly, you don't have the luxury of only picking positive goals to keep you going. Whether it's bad or not, these people desperately need some inspiration to keep them motivated to continue living their messed up lives. He continues on to talk about his own personal goals and says he wants to create a place for those whose lives are full of suffering can feel at ease. As the future head of Kirihito, we can now see what kind of gang he was trying to create with Kirihito. Taguchi, I would say, is the best showcase of this, since his upbringing was absolutely terrible, as mentioned many times by Meguro, but Kirihito was the one place that could make him smile and be at ease. The scene continues as Tanzawa walks away, while Josuke's friends are worried he might try to commit suicide again. Josuke says it's hard to stop someone who was already jumped once, but then he proceeds his next big message, and he says that in life, people hardly have the strength to make things go the way they want, and things like morals and ethics are jokes made by people that have never been driven to a corner. Now, this is an interesting way to view things, because most people don't experience life or death situations normally, and it's easy to believe that people who preach heavily about always being good and having strong morals and ethics haven't been put in a situation where the quickest and safest way out is by breaking those same morals and ethics. Would a passionate believer in morals and ethics act the same way if they lived a life surrounded by violence and having their life in immediate danger 24/7? It's hard to imagine, and this statement separates people like the delinquents from normal middle class people like myself. Like Josuke said, I can't necessarily push the idea of always following morals and ethics no matter what to these delinquents that constantly break them due to just trying to make it out and survive. Because if I was in their shoes, would I do the same thing or would I not? I won't say this justifies the actions of delinquents, but it definitely helped me understand just what kind of life they lived and why they do the things they do. We then move on to the fourth scene, where Tanzawa's mom and boyfriend Minamida are having another argument. This scene pretty much reiterates the same ideas as the first scene of the backstory by continuing to show just the brutal relationship between Tanzawa's mom and Minamida, and just how low he sees her. Like before, Tanzawa attempts to attack him again and ends up in an even worse state than the first time. We see him in the ICU, and we also see Kaname slowly approaching while carrying a bat, saying he's gonna kill Minamida himself. Then we see Josuke intervene and says he wants to handle the situation. There's nothing much to take away here, but I did like how Tanzawa kept trying to save his mother, even though she said what she said to him earlier, and he failed the first time. He just kept trying, and seeing how kind-hearted Kaname was ready to kill for his friend, that was just great to see. And then we move on to the fifth scene. The fifth scene starts off with Josuke confronting Minamida and telling him to leave Tanzawa's family alone. I believe the dialogue that ensues between Josuke and Minamida has the most dramatic importance, which is very ironic given how much I absolutely despise the guy. But let's break down what they were saying. Minamida starts off by talking about how society is. He explains that one misstep is all it takes to ruin your life, and due to how poor the economy is doing, it makes a lot of people very callous, which means it's easy for them to disregard or not care for others. He mentions how poor the welfare system is and says that you mess up at whatever it is you do, you'll be stuck waiting for a second chance that will never come. He says that once you fall into poverty, you'll most likely never climb out that hole by yourself. He then moves the topic to Tanzawa and his mother. He calls them simply unlucky and says the mother only thinks with her legs, and Tanzawa doesn't even know who his father is. He was simply destined for failure the moment he was born. He continues by saying messing up once is enough for society to lose faith in you, and with this in mind, anyone can become a social bottom feeder. With the country being capitalist as well, money is everything, and their system is set up where the rich are always feeding on the poor or the strong are always feeding on the weak. The only thing left the weak can do, if they don't want to be taken advantage of, is to become the strong instead. He says that the only way to keep doing that is by polishing your skills, and if by some miracle you get a second chance, you wouldn't waste it or let it slip through your fingers. He tells Josuke that he should stay in school, he's still young. He should study, gain some social status so people can bring him money for just sitting on a chair. He says that's capitalism. He continues on saying that Delinquent's capital is violence, and he won't let the chance of taking advantage of the Tanzawa family go, because they are his prey and opportunity won't come knocking for them. Josuke ends up fighting and killing him. The cops come in and explain their story. They say he had a good job until he was expelled 6 months ago because he drew the short end of the stick. They also mention he never missed one child support payment. Now, there is a lot to unpack here, and that goes to show just how good the scene was. The bulk of his dialogue can be summed up in 3 main messages. The first being society is too unforgiving for people who have messed up, and its poor economy fosters a culture where people tend to not care for others' problems since they have to prioritize their own. The second is that capitalism is a system that creates this the strong ease the weak dynamic within society, and naturally those at the bottom will feel that their whole world, or society in this case, is against them. And the final message is that when one hits the bottom, it's almost impossible to make it out by yourself, or even to get a second chance. And if by some miracle you do, it's only from polishing your current talents so that you don't fumble your chance when you get it, even if your talent is violence. These 3 messages go a long way in explaining the delinquent culture in Out, and why they are the way they are. Most delinquents in this series are raised in broken homes. Tanzawa speaks a lot of this in his speech, which I might make a separate video on later. It's easy to assume these people are from families with social outcasts, or just people that society has abandoned for failing at whatever it is that they used to do. These people are stuck waiting for their lucky break, or for their next chance that will most likely never come, so they end up stuck in this inescapable cycle. The problems get worsened by the inability to rely on government assistance, as well as capitalism naturally exploiting the poor, so it gets worse and worse over time. The few that do make it out most likely have to do it by taking advantage of someone even lower than they are, so in the grand scheme of things, the absolute worst position to be in will be in the position where you're getting exploited by both the people struggling to make it out and the system itself. The Tanzawa family, and we can assume many others, were unfortunately stuck in this terrible position, and how their lives kept getting worse and worse was just a natural product of their circumstances. As the cop mentioned, the boyfriend got the short end of the stick when it came to a fight for power in his workplace, and he ended up jobless. We can assume it was difficult for him to recover losing such a big job like that for simply being unlucky. But life doesn't wait for anybody, and he still had child support and alimony payments to handle. Relying on government assistance, as mentioned, is out of the question, so there weren't a lot of options left for him to handle his problems. The only thing he has left is his violence, and then he gets his lucky break through the Tanzawa family. By exploiting them and using his capital of violence, he can get enough money to pay his bills and try to make it out. This was an odd twist because I was praying there was absolutely nothing good about this guy, but it just goes to show how messed up these people have to live and what they have to do to make it out. As mentioned earlier, Tanzawa's family was in the absolute worst position when it comes to society, and we can only imagine just how many other characters had to go through similar struggles. Next, we move on to the 6th scene, which takes place in the hospital. Tanzawa's mom starts capping that she loves him the most in the world, and she'll find a better partner. Tanzawa remembers her terrible words, but still tries to console her. We then move on to Josuke. He and Tanzawa are having a talk on the hospital roof. The convo starts off half-jokingly implying that Tanzawa became so physically gifted after his brain surgery. Tanzawa mentioned Minamida and thanks Josuke for everything he's done for him. Tanzawa says he won't jump anymore, and even though he doesn't plan to live until he's super old, he wants to continue living every day to his fullest. Josuke then tells Tanzawa similar things that Minamida was saying. He speaks on how the world is survival of the fittest and the weak can be devoured too easily. He tells Tanzawa that if he becomes one of the strong, he can feed on the weak, but he also adds his own twist by saying you can also choose to treat the weak with kindness. He ends off by saying as far as he's concerned, Tanzawa just being alive is good enough for him. This whole scene was great, since we jokingly got a reason to how our pretty boy gang leader became so overpowered, as well as the moment where Tanzawa's love for Josuke reached a new peak. I like Josuke's message here, because even though there was a lot of truth behind of what Minamida was saying, he forgot to mention that the strong doesn't always have to exploit the weak, but they have the option of helping them as well. His final word to Tanzawa was also very powerful, because it completely juxtaposes what the mother said about him earlier in the flashback. Tanzawa went from hearing his biological birth mother say she wished Tanzawa was never born to hearing Josuke, the man he respects the most, say that as long as Tanzawa is alive, that's good enough for him. His mother's words, as we've seen, hurt Tanzawa to the point of a suicide attempt. So seeing Tanzawa get so emotional, hearing such positivity from Josuke's words, it was just beautiful to see, and I loved every bit of it. The last scene of the backstory happened after a 3-year time skip. We see Yoshiki leave a building, injured, and we see Tanzawa enter it, but Josuke is lying there, having his dying moments. Tears form in Tanzawa's eyes as the man he respected the most is about to die, and Josuke tells him that there is one last request he has for Tanzawa. The backstory proceeds to cut off, leaving us very curious about what exactly Josuke wanted to tell Tanzawa. This scene brings about a lot of questions of the events that happened between Yoshiki and Josuke. There are still a lot of unknown factors of what exactly happened, and we even had Tanzawa double down that Yoshiki is one of the most trustworthy guys in the game. We also have to know what the final request was, because Josuke is a character that carries a lot of weight and history of the series, and what he was going to tell Tanzawa can recontextualize everything we know so far about the conflict with Yoshiki or even the Mad War. I'm very excited to see where this is going to go, and I believe during the fight between Yoshiki and Tanzawa, we will get all our questions answered. Overall, this backstory was simply amazing, and it gave me a lot of new perspectives. Tanzawa's origins, the many thematic messages, Josuke's character, and even the mystery behind his death were all things I love seeing get explored. This series is something special, and I'm excited for its future. If you guys enjoyed the video, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe to show support. I really do appreciate it. Thanks everyone for watching, and I'll catch y'all later. Peace.